Hello and welcome to my podcast, #IamWriting. Episode 2, Researching my mother's past, heritage and culture, and Jamaica's history. I had no idea when I started my research the gold nuggets that would be produced by my delving into both Jamaica and Great Britain's past. I spent 3 months researching each country's history and culture for the period I was interested in, late 19th and early 20th century. It was Maya Angelou who said, and I quote, "I have great respect for the past. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going." End of quote. I understood Maya's sentiment perfectly. Any time I broached the subject about who my father was, Mum's past or her family, she'd get upset and refuse to talk about it. So eventually I stopped asking. But as a result, although I knew my mum loved me to bits, I grew up confused and without a sense of belonging. So my first job was to find Mum's family. Because I had so little information to go on, I decided to place an advert in Jamaica's national newspaper asking if anyone knew her. Within 48 hours, I received a telegram from one of her sisters asking me to ring her. It was that simple to make contact with her family. 3 weeks later, I flew to Jamaica and met her surviving family. 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and a ton of cousins. Due to ill health, Mum wasn't able to travel. As you can imagine, it was a highly emotional experience for me meeting her family. I bombarded my aunts with questions about Mum. I wanted to know every single detail about their childhood in Jamaica. I wanted to know about their schooling, their friends, what they ate, what they did at Christmas. I wanted to know about my grandparents, anything they could remember. I wrote it all down in a notebook that never left my side for the whole 3 weeks I was there. I knew if I was to get a complete picture of my mother's background, I would need to know something about the history of Jamaica and its people. I needed to be able to recall everything so I could tell Mum when I got home. I read about Jamaica's colour prejudice, or racism as it's called today, their class and social structure, which was a mirror image of the class and social structure of Great Britain, circa late 19th and early 20th century. It opened my eyes to how difficult life must have been for my white grandmother, who had married a black Jamaican man. They had 11 children, one of whom was Mum. I thought how brave of my grandmother to follow her heart in spite of the ostracism she would have had to endure by not only white Jamaican society, but all Jamaicans. I wish I'd met her. My mother came to London from Jamaica in April 1939 to live with her malevolent alcoholic aunt, intending to stay only 6 months. But world events, personal tragedy, and malicious intent all combined to prevent her from returning to her family in Kingston. I was particularly interested to know why Mum's parents had sent her to London in April when Britain was anticipating going to war with Germany. They said it was because Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister at the time, had signed a peace pact with Germany's Adolf Hitler, which was meant to mean that a war had been averted. So Mum's family thought it was safe for her to come to London. They wanted to know why Mum hadn't returned to Jamaica once the war was over. I couldn't tell them, because at that time I didn't know. But my research would answer that question much later. I returned home with a lot of anecdotal information for Mum. Out came my notebook again, and this time I jotted down everything I could remember from my childhood. I wrote about Mum's mannerisms, the things we liked to do together, the jobs she had, what made her happy, sad, laugh, cry, her superstitions, of which there were many, her sayings, one of which I've never forgotten. It was her response to people who were verbally nasty about her colour. Quietly, she'd tell them, civility costs nothing. I wanted to expand on my knowledge of Jamaica's history. As a colony of Britain's, I wanted to know more about her history of slavery, her heritage, culture and folklore. so I did some serious research at my local library. During slavery, the plantation remained the most important unit and a rigid class system existed. You were judged to be important according to the type of work you did, the colour of your skin, as well as how much money and land you owned. There were three groups of people: the whites, the coloureds, and the slaves who were black. Among the whites, the most important in society were the planters, who were very rich from the sale of sugar, and owned vast areas of land on which they built great houses, usually on a hill overlooking the plantations and slave houses. Built by expert slave labour, they were manorial, with fine wood panelling, vast rooms, and opening one into another, windows that reached to the floor, and wide staircases modelled on the Georgian style. Below these ample living rooms, gleaming with their shining, smooth, wood-polished floors, were the quarters of the slaves, who lived in cramped, airless conditions, behind stout iron bars at small windows. Next in importance were the traders, who sold merchandise to the people: tools for the estates, food items such as flour, fish, salt beef, cheese, wine, clothing, and candles. They were very wealthy people, but because they didn't own land, they were considered less important than the planters. After the traders came the coloureds, half white and half black, mulatto, the result of a white man having a child by a black woman, although it was against the law for white women to have children with a black man. The coloureds thought they were better than the slaves, mainly because they were not fully black, their reason being that the closer they came to being white, the more important they were. Some planters did free their mulatto children, and in this way a large number of coloureds were free to start their own businesses. Then there were the skilled slaves. Among these people were midwives, wheelwrights, masons, and carpenters. Next came the house slaves, the blacks who worked as butlers, cooks, nurses, ladies' maids, and coachmen in the kitchen, stable, or garden. They worked closely to their master, and were frequently beaten, particularly if he or she was upset about something. Punishment was often brutal. For example, when a little girl was beaten and nailed through her ears to a tree for having broken a special cup belonging to her master. The lowliest, and they amounted to more than half the slaves in Jamaica, were field slaves, and it was primarily on their backs Jamaica became a jewel in the British Empire. They prepared the land, planted, cut and carried the canes to the mills, then ground it, made the sugar, and carried it to the ships. I found a couple of travel books on Jamaica in the late 1890s and 1900s, which had lots of interesting information about tourists, and gave a really good view of what life was like in Jamaica for colonials living there. I'd spent hours poring over microfilm from the London Times archive, frequently forgetting my original purpose and getting absorbed in something else totally unrelated to my search. I was beginning to accumulate a lot of information about Jamaica, and certainly getting a sense for what it was like for Mum growing up there. But there was another source of information I wanted to tap into. The Jamaican national newspaper, The Gleaner. They had an archive section, and I spent weeks reading newspaper articles and learning about Jamaicans' belief in Christianity and obeah. Obeah is the practice of magic with religious overtones. Apparently, obeah practitioners control the supernatural world. It was an illegal practice in Jamaica, but techniques were passed down in secret from one generation to another, and everyone, no matter their class or colour, practiced obeah. With obeah, duppies or ghosts and other spirits can be made to act either in one's favour or against one's enemies, or to counteract spells placed by others. A skilled obeah man can hold a man's spirit in a half-world between life and death, making the victim a zombie. Once controlled, a zombie can be sent on errands, the objectives of which may be to do good or to do evil. I learnt about Jamaicans' chronic gambling habits, how much they loved the mother country, their social mores, their superstitions, and the amount of travelling done sailing back and forth from the West Indies to London and vice versa, by school children, merchants, traders, tourists, etc., a journey that could take 3 weeks. Part of my book is set in London, from 1939 to 1960, and I believed every topic in the book needed to be researched for that time frame. That included life pre-World War II in Jamaica and London, and the build-up to war being declared, life during World War II, which included nursing, entertainment, unmarried mothers, rationing, evacuation, the Blitz, doodlebugs, and the reactions from people to the end of the war, and life post-World War II. In particular, I researched the 1950s, when there was a distinct wind of change in the class and social structure of life in Britain, especially towards people of colour. The latter was brought about by the arrival of the Empire Windrush, with hundreds of Jamaicans aboard. They had been invited by the British government to come to the UK to work due to a labour shortage and to help rebuild the economy after World War II. But Londoners had become angry and violent towards West Indians, who were being blamed for taking Londoners' jobs, their housing and their women. I travelled a few times to Kew in Richmond, Surrey, to visit the National Archives, where a collection of over 11 million historical government and public records are held, and which collection is one of the largest in the world. The main reason I was there was to research my family history. I was interested in trying to locate, through the UK census of 1901, members of my grandmother's family, who originated from Paddington in London and emigrated to Jamaica around 1898. I also wanted to view the lists of passengers and ships that arrived into and departed from the UK between 1878 and 1960. I was trying to find the ship Mum arrived on, and I did. I burst into tears when I saw her name. The National Archive is a stunning resource for genealogists, and definitely worth a trip. Then, of course, there was the BBC's Wartime Archive Department, a prime resource to discover what life was like for people in London between the years 1939 to 1945. When I couldn't think of any other resource to research, I started to put everything onto post-it notes. Every single comment, memory, action, anecdote, etc. had its own post-it note, until I had one huge wall covered in multicoloured post-it notes. Each colour represented a different category, topic, country, or time frame. Using these research resources made me aware of how important it is to preserve and learn about the past, whether it's one's own personal history or history in general. I got as much enjoyment accessing records from such diverse resources as I did writing my book. And I'm so grateful we all have these illustrious organisations to learn from. Tune in to Episode 3, Part 1, How I Structured and Formatted My Book. If you have any comments or feedback, you can contact me at mariecampbell43@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.